Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to lesson MED.4.4 on Franconian notation and Petronian dots of division. So, Franco of Cologne published his treatise Ars Cantus Mensurabilis, or The Art of Measured Song, somewhere between 1250 and 1280, laying out a rhythmic system that tried, and largely succeeded, to remove rhythmic ambiguity from notation. He didn't invent any new symbols, but devised clear rules for how to interpret them. So, as a reminder of our symbols, we have our duplex longa, we have our longa, which could be perfect or imperfect. We have our breve, which could be correct or altered. We have semi-breve, which now can be major or minor. There was only one semi-breve before. Now we're going to have some new thoughts about the semi-breve. So under each note is the number of tempora it gets, the medieval understanding of the beat, the tempus, or plural, tempora. So like the pre-Franconian notation, the breve generally gets one beat, longa gets 2 or 3. Semi-breve is less than 1. Rests have shifted slightly from pre-Franconian notation. Usually this is a breve. Previously it was a semi-breve. This is an imperfect longa. This is a perfect longa. So the amount of space each rest spans is the number of beats or tempora that it covers. So 1 beat, 2 beat, 3 beat. That makes sense. Plikas are the same as we have seen. They're kind of dropping out of favor around this time. You don't see a lot of them, but if you do, then same idea. Rules should be largely familiar, but we'll go over them again. A longa is perfect if it is followed by another longa, 2 breves, or 3 breves. So if you have a longa, and then it's followed by a longa, or by 2 breves, or by 3 breves, it's going to be perfect. Okay, cool. A longa is imperfect if it is followed by 1, or by more than 3 breves. The first breve forms a perfection with the longa, and the remaining breves are grouped in 3s. So, in this case, we have a longa, and then if you have 1 breve, then that would be ba ba. If you have more than 3, like 4, ba ba, grouped in 3, ba 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 ba. If you have 1 breve left at the end, it'll imperfect the following longa. So ba 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 ba. If you have 2 breves at the end, the last one gets altered. Ba 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 ba. So those actually result in the same rhythm in this case. Funky. If you want to change the groupings, you can use a short stroke, signum perfectionis, to separate perfections. So if you wanted to be like, no, this first one is a perfection, you just put a stroke there. Ba 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 would then become a perfection, and then ba ba ba. So that's a different sort of notation indicated by the stroke. The same rules that apply to longas and breves largely also apply to breves and semi-breves. Before, you couldn't have a single semi-breve. Now you can do your own thing with semi-breves. I guess they still can't appear 1, but you could have more than 2 or 3. So, sorry about that moment of excitement. That'll come later. Groups of more than 3 semi-breves are treated differently. While this doesn't occur too often, long chains of semi-breves are interpreted as follows. Arrange semi-breves in pairs with alteration. So here we have a breve, and then we would want to alter the second of each of these pairs. Ba, 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 ba. We alter, we double the length of every other semi-breve. Here, the number of semi-breves is uneven, so the final group is going to be a group of 3. So we imperfect, but then we have an extra one left over, so we'll just group that in. Ba, 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 ba. Notice that instead of 3-4, we're in 9-8 because we have this triplet-based rhythm as a result of imperfection. Ligatures. We saw ligatures get more complicated in pre-Franconian notation. We'll codify exactly what they're doing. So ligatures are categorized by their first and last note values. All notes in the middle of a ligature are breves. So again, when we're dealing with these rules, we have single notes going on. Now we're dealing with ligatures. So separate idea. If a ligature is with propriety, cum proprietate, there we go, then the first note is going to be a breve. So if it's an ascending ligature, there's no stroke on the first note. If it's a descending ligature, there is a stroke on the first note. if a ligature is without propriety, sine proprietate, the first note is a longa. So in an ascending ligature, the first note will have a stroke on it. In a descending ligature, the first note will not have a stroke on it. This is sounding complicated. You're just going to want to look at the chart, but these are how the rules came about. You could also have cum opposita proprietate, with the opposite propriety, where the first two notes are both semibrevs. So either you start with a brev, you start with a longa, or the first two notes are two semibrevs. And again, terrible at drawing diamonds in that direction for unknown reasons. So an ascending ligature, you would have an upward stroke. A descending ligature, you would also have an upward stroke. So if you have an upward stroke on the first note, then the first two notes of the ligature are both going to be semibrevs. If you have cum perfectione, with perfection, the final note of the ligature is going to be a longa. In an ascending ligature, the final note is turned towards the left, so like you see there. In a descending ligature, the final note is a square. And you might wonder, what's the difference? Well, if you're sine perfectione, the final note being a brev, in an ascending ligature, the final note would be turned towards the right. So looking at that versus that, left turning to left, turn to the right. In a descending ligature, the final note is going to be a diagonal. So you can see diagonal notes. Exciting. Technically, this information will allow you to identify the rhythm of any ligature. You're just going to want to look at the table, and that gives you brevs, longs, semibrevs. So since all the middle notes must be brevs, the fifth mode can no longer be written as a ligature because it's three longs in a row. In fact, Franco vehemently warns against this because he was concerned that people would try to do that because they'd always done it that way. So if you want more than three semibrevs to fit into a brev, what can you do? Petrus de Cruce wanted to do this, and he invented a new notation to indicate groups of semibrevs known as the punctus divisionis, or the dot of division. So the basic principle is encapsulated in this delightful poem. A poet who came from Japan wrote verses that never would skim. People said, but the thing doesn't go with the swing, and he said, yes, but I will try to get as many syllables into the last line as I possibly can. So the idea is that if you want to fit a whole bunch of notes into a small space, then you just put a dot around a bunch of semibrevs. Okay, now drawing diamonds in that direction isn't going well either. As many semibrevs as you want. As long as there are dots on either side of them, they squish into the space of one brev. So they're very tiny. When you're reading a manuscript, there's one here, and there's one here, which you can be forgiven for wondering if those are just printing artifacts. It's a little easier to see in the manuscript, but I think there's one there. That I'm honestly not sure if that is one or not. But those two definitely are. So, oh yeah, no it is. So 2, a group of 1, 2, 3, a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nope, did I miss? I missed one. There's one here. 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2. So for a modern interpretation of these clumps of semibrevs, if you just have one semibrev in a group, it would actually be a brev because it fits in a brev. You just see a brev. If you have 2, ba-ba. If you have 3, and then it would just be divided equally. Ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. I think I had an extra one there. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. So if you have a motet that uses large numbers of notes, you often perform them at slower tempos to be able to actually physically sing all of these notes. So the brev would slow down from 120 to around 80 to allow for that to happen. So experiment some with Franconian notation, and I will see you next time.